Hi everyone and welcome to Niamh's Art Journaling channel. Today we're going to be looking at our holiday card series and we're going to be doing some 3D Scenic landscapes. So to do this you need 3 pieces of card. I'm using A5 card and just fold it down through the center crease just so you know where you're stamping. Now the series of stamps I'm using are from a company called PSX, Personal Stamp Exchange, who aren't making stamps anymore, but they're just the most beautiful vintage type stamps. However, this technique you can use with lots of different stamps. What you're doing is on the 3 different pieces of card creating a foreground, a middle ground and a background. So in the first bit, the foreground, I've just stamped the truck and I've stamped it down really low on the page. In the midground, I'm stamping the ski chalet. Again, I'm stamping it sort of in the lower middle half of the card. And I'll show how this all works together at the end. Obviously in the background, you're going to stamp it up slightly higher and that's going to be what you see in the background. To stamp, I'm using a VersaFine card. VersaFine ink, so a permanent ink. You can certainly stamp this and emboss it with black embossing powder, particularly if you're doing watercolors. It helps contain the colors within your where you're coloring. All I'm doing now is just really quickly and roughly cutting out around my images and just saving those offcuts, and you can see how I'm starting to build this up. I've just done some wavy lines off either end and that sort of represents snowdrifts, and then I've just cut roughly around the images. The reason I'm doing this is it gives me an idea of where I want to stamp my background, and I'm just sort of sorting out which stamps I want in the background. And you can see here what beautiful images they are. Now if you're lucky enough to have some of these fabulous stamps in your range, keep them, or you can sell them and make a fortune, because if you go and have a look at Personal Stamp Exchange stamps on eBay at the moment, some of them are going for 60 to 90 US dollars. They're just crazy prices because they're such high quality stamps. Penny Black does a lot of scene type stamps that would work really well with this, particularly with their cute little critters as well. You could do something like that. Instead of having buildings, you could have critters and forest scenes that way. Lawn fawn stamps are another alternative that you could use. Again, they've got lots of stamps that work together, and it doesn't have to be a winter scene to do this type of stamping. You could do this with anything. It's just creating that foreground, middle ground, background. So these 2 stamps are sort of background stamps anyway of a village scene. Just stamping it down the middle, and I'm not worried about the bottom half because that's obviously going to be covered by the other 2 pieces. Now all I'm doing is get a rough torn piece of paper, and I've got this mountain stamp, and I'm just using that to mask off the background. It doesn't really matter if some of the lines go onto the trees because they blend in, and because it's all done in black ink you can't really tell the difference. With the little bits at the end which didn't quite meet up, I'm just going back with a stamp and adding them in, and you can see particularly on that middle crease, it didn't really matter they didn't match up because it just looks like the lines of the mountain. So that's pretty much the card made. It's fairly simple. It's just putting together your different bits and pieces. Now all I'm going to do is actually just go in with an X-Acto knife and fussy cut around it. I prefer to use a knife like this to cut. I'm just used to it. Certainly you could use a pair of scissors to go around the images. It's whatever you're used to. One of the things I find when I'm using the knife though is move your image, not your knife. So you can see my knife is roughly staying in the same place. I'm moving my image around. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is make sure you've got lots of spare blades. While they do stay sharp for quite a while, it's always when you're doing something that you want to be really neat when it starts to tear the paper. So if you've got lots of spare blades around, it really helps. With the tree on the truck, I wasn't being too particular about going around every little branch. I just sort of roughly cut out around it because I can use some watercolor techniques just to look like it's faded down. So these are the 3 pieces together. And to make this work, because it sort of works as a pop-up image, you need to make the foreground piece the shortest piece, the middle ground the middle size piece, and the background obviously is the full length. Now I'm not giving you any particular measurements because you can change this yourself. In this image I've sort of used a 1/2 inch off with my first piece and a 1/4 inch off for my second piece. I actually go back at the end and retrim them again because I wasn't quite happy with the depth of it. So what you do to put this together is to glue down one side all together, glue down the other side together, and you can see the gap now. When you open it up, it pulls one image forward. I saved you the hassle of seeing me colour it in because it took me a little while to do. I've coloured this in using Tombow markers. You can see the series of colours up there, and the sparkle you can see is I think it's the Nouveau pen. I can't remember what it's called now. A Whisper pen. It's like a brush pen that's got glitter in it, and it's amazing. It's just so sparkly. It's one of the first times I've actually used it for snow, and I was blown away by it, so I would highly recommend that. So you can see how I put that together using double-sided tape, and I used the red liner tape, which is a lot stronger, stickier, to stick it all together. Now all I'm doing is decorating the front of my card, and this bit I actually found more difficult to do than the inside because I had a real idea of what I was doing for the inside, and it was like, how do I tie the inside and the outside, and I wasn't sure how to do it. One of the big problems I had though is I love using navy cardstock to do Christmas cards, and I don't have any anymore. I've gone through my whole stash. So what I used is some distress inks to colour up the edges. I didn't worry about the middle because I knew I was going to cover it with another stamp. Again, these are all Personal Stamp Exchange stamps. I decided I was just going to do a whole retro, use your old stamps, go with this card. So you can see on the door my stamped image didn't perfectly stamp out, and I just used a thin black marker pen to fill in the lines that I'd missed out stamping. And again, you can do that really easily with stamped image, particularly if you're going to colour it in. It's not going to matter all that much. In the background I used some silver squid ink just to give some texture into that blue, to add some detail to it. So now all I'm doing is cutting up a mounting piece of paper to stick my door onto, and you can see I'm using the grids on the glass mat to do that, just to trim it off somewhat. The ruler I'm using is a Tim Holtz ruler too. It's got a metal edge against that flat side, which again is really good when you're using an X-Acto knife. I'm terrible with cutters. I struggle with them, so I tend to go back to using a knife. So here's a sample of how I coloured in using my Tombow markers, just using the different shades, colouring it in. You can, because it's got the brush marker on it, I find it really handy to go in and use that. If you use some really good quality paper or watercolour paper, you can actually put a water brush over this and get beautiful watercolour effects with them as well. The cardstock that I'm using at the moment wasn't brilliant for doing that. It sank the colours into the paper a lot and sort of washed them out. So just have some test papers around. Those papers that you cut off at the beginning when you're doing that rough cut around your foreground, middle ground, background are great for doing some tests of colours, particularly if you've got a lot there and you're not sure. The Tombow range is amazing, but you can see in the bucket that I've got there, there's lots of colours there that look almost the same, but when you put them on paper they do have really subtle differences, and the whole reason for that obviously is so you can go in and do your shading and so on. But when you're just picking something out of the bucket, you're not 100% sure. Again, because they're sort of my go-to colouring things, sort of know which colours I really like using. But if you're unsure, you're using them for the first time, this is the pen that I was using with the sparkle on it. So again, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's amazing, and I'll put the details for it in the link below. If you're doing this or doing a series of cards and you want to use the same colours, it's probably a good idea to swatch them out and write the colour name next to it, just so you know what colour you're using and you can match it up again. I was going to put this onto the white piece of card and do some stuff to it, but I wasn't really liking how it was going, so I decided in the end I'd go to my scrapbooking pile, and I had this piece of paper from Basic Grey, which had sort of the light blue and the snowflakes, which I thought tied sort of the background. I really like torn edges, so I've torn that up, and the chipboard piece that I've got here is one of the Tim Holtz Ideology Christmas pieces that came out. I'm just edging the edges with a dark grey marker, and then using again that red liner tape to tape it down. And to tape my piece of paper, I'm just using double-sided tape. The reason I'm using the red liner tape on the chipboard is it's because that's a little bit thicker, and I just want to make sure it's really secure. If you wanted to, and I was debating doing that here, you can put some foam tape on to raise the door up, just to give it a little bit of extra texture. I decided in the end, because I've got all the interest on the inside, I didn't want to do too much to the outside. I wanted to leave it fairly plain so people got the surprise when they opened up the inside. So here I am putting the inside in. You saw me before I put in all the tape. What I've done here is I didn't trim it down properly, and I would suggest you do that. Again, with my original navy cardstock, it is actually a bit wider than this white cardstock, so they sit in really nicely and have a lovely edge to it. All I'm doing now is going around with my grey marker just to edge the cut edges so it all blends in together. Now, I accidentally went over the edge there, and I'm just using a water brush to wash it off, and that worked really, really well. So this is a finished card. It is really simple to do. You can take as much time and effort as you want to do the colouring. In this image here, you can see the shadow of the truck, so you can see the 3 dimensions in it. I also added a Joy to the World sticker that I had just to add a greeting on the inside. So I hope this has inspired you to have a look at your older stamps, or your Scenic stamps, to put them together and to create something really new. And remember, this isn't just for the holidays. You can certainly do this technique for any cards throughout the year. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!